We're here this afternoon to talk about two issues. The first is to provide an update on progress that was made in connection with the murder of retired firefighter Dwayne Williams. And for that, I'll turn to the superintendent and then to the Chief Deanahan, the chief of the detective division. Then we'll come back and give an update regarding the case involving Miss Young.
All questions at the end for all?
Yeah, let's do questions at the end.
Good afternoon. A 15-year-old male was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and attempted robbery with a firearm. This individual is one of 4 young men that attempted to carjack a retired firefighter who was buying popcorn in the Morgan Park neighborhood on the south side. The death of Lieutenant Dwayne Williams was a tragedy. I grieve alongside his family and friends. Detectives are also interviewing an adult who's believed to be involved in this case, and we are on the lookout for 2 others who are involved. Before I turn it over to Chief of Detective Brendan Deanahan, I want to applaud the hard work of investigators for their diligence in this case. They went to work right away and called upon our suburban partners to bring these offenders to justice. The death of a first responder is always tragic, and sadly, this day marks a terrible day that we hope will bring closure to the family. Brendan?
Thank you, Mayor and Superintendent, and to echo what the Superintendent stated, please keep the victim's family in your prayers, because it is the holiday season, and although this may bring some small closure for them, they'll be without Dwayne Williams for Christmas this year. So please keep the family in your thoughts. I think we know what happened that day. So it was on the 3rd of December, just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon at 118th and Western, as the superintendent mentioned, when the retired lieutenant was getting popcorn, and then he was tragically killed because of these offenders wanting to take his vehicle. As the superintendent mentioned, as of now, we have 1 juvenile offender, 15 years of age, who's been charged with this crime. There's an additional adult in custody, and we're seeking 2 more adults. Basically, to give a brief synopsis of the investigation, we saw what happened that day. Those individuals were in a stolen car. The detectives then figured out where that car was stolen from, the Ford Fusion, and we worked with South Suburban departments to gather video from that incident. That incident led to other steals and other carjacking crimes that this crew was involved in. So basically, the detectives were working with several different South Suburban departments. The FBI was involved, and this is a carjacking crew who's involved in multiple different offenses. Detectives worked very diligently to gather some evidence once the Ford Fusion was recovered out in Tinley Park, and then continued to work with our South Suburban departments. I can't explain enough how much the South Suburban departments and the FBI were of great assistance to the detectives in this case, working together as a team to provide us information, because the South Suburban departments were very familiar with this crew and believe they knew some of these offenders. Eventually, through evidence and through some technology, the detectives were able to narrow it down to these 4 individuals. And last night, with the assistance of the FBI and, as I mentioned, the South Suburban team, they had arrest warrants for 2 individuals. And when they effected the arrest warrants, we were able to arrest one of the individuals responsible for this case, and then a second individual was taken into custody. That is the basic synopsis at this time. Mayor, do you want me to take questions on this now?
Why don't we take questions on this first? And, let me just also, if I can.
Excuse me.
I had the privilege of speaking at Mr. Williams' funeral on Saturday, and it was quite a testament to the man that he was. Words from his family, of course, his wife, Karen, who was just remarkable in giving eulogy to her deceased husband, the 4 daughters, grandchildren, and others who really talked about the kind of man that Dwayne Williams was and how he touched so many lives. And I want to repeat the words of his nephew who spoke at the funeral. He said that if those men had given his uncle 5 more minutes, not only would he have talked them out of the crime that they were about to commit, but he would have showed them how to turn their lives in a different direction, and that he would have been there to help them do that. Unfortunately, he didn't get those additional 5 minutes, and we know the results. I had the opportunity to speak with Mrs. Williams this morning to share with her this news. As you might imagine, it was bittersweet. I think she was happy, a measure of happiness that the people responsible were found. But as you might imagine, her life is still shattered. There was a lot of tears, and I suspect there will be many more shed in the days ahead. This is something that has irreparably changed their lives, and unfortunately, too many victims in our city, particularly when it comes to gun violence. But I think let's take the questions on this topic, and then we'll switch to the second, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chief or Superintendent, the first question.
I don't know, Dana, if you can just speak up a little bit.
sure.
He may be able to hear you, but
Yep.
with my bad hearing, I'm not having.
Of course. So the first set of questions about this case comes from Charlie Wojciechowski at NBC5. Does the 15-year-old, and if you mention this and I didn't catch it, I'm sorry. Does the 15-year-old have a record? Was a weapon recovered? And was this a high priority because of the victim's roles with CFD and OEMC?
Okay, you asked a lot of questions there. So he's a juvenile, so I'm not going to go into his background because of his juvenile and the different juvenile rights that are involved. Your second question was there a weapon recovered? Yesterday, when the arrest had taken place, the FBI and the South Suburban team executed a subsequent search warrant, and a weapon was recovered. And we are now testing that weapon to see if it was possibly the weapon used in this incident. Your third question was
this a high priority because of the victim's roles with CFD, the Chicago Fire Department, and OEMC?
So I think the superintendent talks about this a lot. So unfortunately, and the mayor just spoke about the gun violence that occurs in Chicago. So every time somebody is shot or a victim of a crime or a carjacking, and specifically in a terrible case like this, a murder, there's detectives assigned to complete the investigation. So for the detectives, every single detective goes out and does the best job of which they're capable to bring it to a conclusion. I understand due to the victim being a retired fire lieutenant, it may have taken on some more media attention than some of the other cases. But the case was worked the same as other murders are worked within the Chicago Police Department.
And the next question is from Will Jones at ABC7, but also Fran Spielman from the Sun-Times had a question that is encompassed in this too, and that is whether it's for you or the soup. What is your reaction to the age of the suspect, the 15-year-old, and the number of carjackings plaguing the city right now? And my follow-up is there anything different moving forward being done about trying to prevent those carjackings? But those first two questions are most key.
The age, anytime we have a juvenile suspect, it's always shocking and takes us aback of what we could have done to redirect this young person's life so early on. 15 is so young to be involved in such a heinous crime. We're always asking ourselves, is there something parents, peers, schools, something we could have done or said to redirect this young person? So we always think it's a failure in our ability to change our young people's behavior. But with that said, his actions were heinous. The fact that this murder took place as a result of a car being taken is something that is so tragic for this family that we owe it to this victim and his family to bring everyone, regardless of their age, to justice on this case. As it relates to your second question, I'm gonna try to wrap an answer in it for the sake of time. We have obviously had such a challenging year as it relates to all types of crime, particularly violent crime. We are focused and are doubling down on what's what has worked. We have brought some of the carjacking suspects to justice. We've arrested, at last count, about 136 carjackers this year, just this year. We've had an extraordinary spike, but we have made some arrests. We need to make many more arrests. We're not satisfied, and we're not going to stop pursuing these suspects until they're all captured, is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it on this case, yes.
Thank you, Chief. Let's now turn to the incident at Miss Anjanette Young's home back in February of 2019. As I said yesterday, I first saw a portion of the video that's been widely shown earlier this week on Tuesday morning, and it left me upset, angry, appalled as a human being and as a black woman. And immediately I put myself in Miss Young's place, and I know that this could happen to me. It could happen to any other black or brown person, not just in Chicago, but elsewhere. And it is shocking to think about having officers break into your home in the middle of the night. It's horrifying. As I said yesterday, I've not been sparing in expressing my views to all involved about this colossal failure, not just the search, and that will get addressed through the COPA process, but also with the handling of this matter. I learned yesterday after I spoke that, in fact, Ms. Young did file a FOIA request. So I stand corrected on that. That request was filed with the Chicago Police Department in November of 19. That request was denied. And I've asked for a top-to-bottom understanding of why that was denied. And here's what I think about that. Anytime a person who's a victim requests information about an incident that happened to them, our government's obligation is to respond in a fulsome, transparent, and immediate way. So I've talked at length with the superintendent about this. I've talked at length with Cindy Roberts, the head of COPA. We will change our policies and procedures to make sure that a victim who reaches out shouldn't have to file a FOIA request, should just get the information that they seek. That's important, and we will make that change. I want to also say that I've reached out to Ms. Young through her counsel to request an opportunity to speak with her directly. I feel like we're talking to each other at podiums and in press conferences. I'd like to have that conversation with her in person, and I will see whether or not my request is granted by her counsel. And why through the counsel? Because she's represented, and ethically I have to go through her counsel. I can't reach out to her directly. In addition, I want to update you that since I spoke yesterday, I have now become aware that in November of 19, when CBS was doing a continued reporting on the series of search warrant cases, some of the reporting included, I think you mentioned this yesterday, Dana, Miss Young's case. I knew generally about the reporting, which is what prompted me to have our chief risk officer get involved to reform the search warrant process. But I've now come to learn that in November of 19, this Ms. Young's case and others were lifted up to my attention. I don't have any contemporaneous recollection of this, but what I now know, having looked at some emails, is my team knew that this was an issue of great concern for me, issues meaning about the search warrants. They knew that I had tasked our chief risk officer to look into this and to work on reforming the policy, so this was lifted up to me as yet another example. Again, I don't have any specific recollection of it. It was in November when I was probably focused on budget issues and getting our budget passed through City Council, but it was flagged for me. And I repeat again that the first time I actually saw the video itself was Tuesday morning when it posted. I actually think it was Monday night, but I saw it Tuesday morning when it posted on CBS 2's website. So going forward, I think our task is very clear. as I mentioned, number one, anytime a victim wants information about the matter involving them, and I want to say a case because I don't want to make it that formal, we've got to be more responsive and do a better job, and we're going to do that. No one needs to suffer needlessly in the way that Ms. Young has and countless others, so we've got to get that right. In a moment, Superintendent Brown will provide further details on the new policies and procedures at the Chicago Police Department regarding search warrants as well as body-worn camera usage. But I want to elaborate again on what changes we made just in January of this year as a result of the reporting that was done by CBS 2. Requires independent collaboration of information received from a third party, and that third party cannot be paid or receive compensation. And let me emphasize why that's important. What we don't want to do is incentivize people to provide any information. We want credible information that is that the crime has been committed and evidence of the crime will be located in a particular location. Those lines get blurred if a third party confidential informant is being paid. So that's important. Body-worn cameras must be worn and activated when the search warrant is being conducted. At least 2 uniform officers have to be in uniform as part of the search warrant team. Why is that important? Somebody brings in your door in the middle of the night and they're not obviously the police, you're not going to let them in. And you're going to think that you're being robbed or attacked. So having those uniform officers present is important. One thing that also is important that we put into the new policy is if there is a wrong address, that requires a CR investigation to be initiated. Why is that important? Because we need to know what happened. We don't need to have happen what happened here, which is it languishes for some period of time and there's no accountability in getting to the facts. That's important. As I mentioned, there are provisions to protect children because we've seen in instances that children were not taken care of in the way that they should have, and they were further harmed. And then it requires 2 internal supervisors to sign off on a warrant before it is presented to the prosecutor. Previously, it was just 1 supervisor. Now, it's got to be a sergeant and at least a lieutenant, if not higher, as a sign-off. That's another safeguard to make sure that eyes are on these search warrant applications before they move out the door to a prosecutor and a court. And as Superintendent Brown will elaborate in a moment, I've directed him to ensure that the video of what happened in Ms. Young's house will be used as a training tool for the police, of course with Ms. Young's consent. That is for the simple reason that officers need to fully understand the significance and trauma that happens every time there's a search warrant initiated on someone's house, whether they are actually a participant in a crime, but especially when they are not. That is the profound responsibility that we all have. I also want to say this. I got, I think, helpful feedback yesterday from some reporters in the press pool about yesterday's press conference. And I want to just say that I specifically reached out to the reporter that I was particularly tough on by name yesterday and apologized for calling him out. I can never let my frustrations and my emotions get the better of me, and I think I did yesterday. I have also directed the law department to provide me with a review of all pending search warrant cases, and I expect that that review will come to me either later today or tomorrow. And as I said, if there are other wrongs that need to be righted, we are going to do just that. We're not going to string these cases out. We're not going to run up attorneys' fees. If we are in the wrong, we're going to own it, and we're going to make sure that those wrongs are corrected with all deliberate speed. In addition to this, I have ordered a review of the city's video release policy. You'll recall that I was one of the authors of the existing video release policy that went into effect, I believe, in February of 2016. The superintendent and I have talked many times over his entire tenure about the need to change that policy. The policy, when it was put in place, was one of the first in the nation, a written policy that mandated when the release of video, audio, and those initial case reports. It was focused exclusively on use of force cases, deaths in custody, police-involved shootings. I think this situation with Ms. Young lets us know that we need to think broader about that policy. As I said before, whenever a victim wants information about something that's happened to them, they should be able to get it, and we need to shrink the time period in which that information is released to the public. I'll also note that the redacted, meaning we obviously shielded Miss Young's face and body, but that video is up on a web portal that will be available in its entirety as of I think about an hour ago. And finally, I'll be calling upon the state legislature to make changes in the Body-Worn Camera Act, which went into effect, I believe, in 2016. We have to have more flexibility there. It's a very high threshold when there's not an arrest to be able to release body-worn camera video footage, and we've got to change that. I think these circumstances clearly show that there's got to be more flexibility. So I'll be working with members of the General Assembly to make that change. You know, as I said earlier, bearing witness to what Miss Young experienced was extraordinarily disturbing and traumatic for all the reasons that I've said. For me as a black woman, and knowing that that could have easily been me. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I've had a lot of conversation with a lot of people, particularly my black female friends. We all feel exactly the same. We feel outraged. We feel like her dignity and our dignity was denied, that she was humiliated. And she's emblematic, unfortunately, of too many wrongs that have been visited upon black women and women of color, not just in our city, but in our city. And I have an obligation to make that wrong right. It's been painful, and upsetting. But I think this gives us an opportunity to look at what happened from top to bottom, from before those officers went into her house in February of 19 to today. And we can do better, and we will do better as a city. I am determined to make sure that that happened. This should not happen to anybody else. It can't happen. It shouldn't happen in this time. There's a lot of trust that's been breached, and I know that there's a lot of trust in me that's been breached, and that I have a responsibility to build back that trust. I have a responsibility to build back the trust of our city, of our police department, and all of government. As I said to my senior team early this morning, there's a lot of good things that we have already done and that we want to do for the city to make government far more accountable to our residents and make sure that their lived experience is actually reflected in what we do. We can't do that if we don't have trust. We can't do that if we're not viewed with legitimacy. I understand that entirely, profoundly, sadly. And we will do better, and we will win back the trust that we have lost this week. So.
Let me start with 3 values that I think are appropriate to apply to Ms. Young's circumstance here that I deeply believe in. Number 1, everyone deserves a measure of respect. Everyone. And it's always the right time to do the right thing. And the final one is, we must be the first to admit our mistakes. The first. Not because a judge told us, not because we have litigation, but because it's the right thing to do, to be the first to admit your mistakes. The video of the raid of Miss Young's home is hard to watch. It's hard not to feel Miss Young's anguish and fear and pain when viewing that video. I have been personally nurtured by very strong, smart black women in my entire life. Miss Young reminds me of those women who nurtured me. And as the mayor previously stated, we revised our search warrant policy back in January 2020, and I'll just go and recount some of the revisions in January, and then I'll recount some of the revisions we made recently this month. First of all, as the mayor mentioned, we need to corroborate confidential informant information from a third party that is not paid. Additionally, if children are present, we are required to exercise due care and a sensitive approach to safeguard the emotional and physical well-being to minimize trauma to these young people present. And as the mayor mentioned as well, if a search warrant is executed at the wrong home, a CR number and a city claims notification will be completed so that we can have a record of what happened. We also want to restrict access and utilization of registered confidential informants to the Bureau of Counterterrorism and restrict that access to narcotics gangs teams for consistency. Additionally, December 2020, this month, we added additional changes to our search warrant policy to include no-knock warrants will only be approved if there is a danger to life and safety that has been articulated clearly. And only a high-level bureau chief can approve that no-knock warrant. And in the process of approving that no-knock warrant, only our top-notch warrant operations, SWAT, will serve those warrants. And finally, we are currently in the process of adding an additional body-worn camera to SWAT, narcotics, and gang teams so that we could have video of every unit, every officer who might serve a warrant. Of course, none of this makes what happened to Ms. Young any better. And it's important to acknowledge her pain. But talk is cheap and it's empty. We need to ensure that this never happens again with reformed policies, procedures, and accountability for the mistake. I'll repeat again, everyone deserves a measure of respect. Even if we had been in the right house, Ms. Young should have been treated with respect. The fact that we're in the wrong house should have guided us toward even going further to respect this woman and her family. Because it's always the right time to do the right thing. And we should have been first to admit our mistake. It shouldn't have been months later, a year and a half later before we're at this podium admitting we made a mistake. Be the first to admit your mistake. I'll turn it back over to the mayor so we can start taking questions. Thank you. Mayor.
Actually, these questions are probably most suitable for you, Superintendent.
I'm sorry?
These
The
questions, yeah, the first couple I have, they're from Michelle Gallardo at ABC 7 regarding this topic. I'll stay with this topic and then move on. You just talked about restricting no-knock search warrants, the execution of them, but Michelle asks, how is a knock and announce warrant any different from a no-knock when the resident, such as Ms. Young, is given only 5 seconds before officers begin to break into their home? Should there be a minimum wait time established to allow a resident to come to the door on their own?
Let me give this example because I think there's some conflation of what a no-knock is and what a knock and announce is. A no-knock warrant is that you don't identify yourself when you're at the door, but you identify yourself once you're in the door. And you just open the door through whatever means, whatever, a pry tool or whatever, and go in, and then you announce. That's a no-knock. And those circumstances we're describing are if, the best example is people are being killed inside and you hear the shots being fired. This is the Columbine example where shots are being fired, people are being killed, and announcing yourselves either puts those people being shot at in further danger or it puts the officers in danger that are coming through the door. That's the circumstance that we are restricting our no-knock policy to.
Okay. And how many mistaken address search warrants have been executed in Chicago this year since the new policies were implemented in January?
I think the mayor said this the right way. We're reviewing all search warrants to ensure we capture all of the search warrants that are in play this year to answer that question more appropriately. We don't want to guess at this. We want to just review everything that's in the hopper from this year to see what we do have. And I could just tell you, the mayor said it best, we're going to find what we did wrong and we're going to correct it.
This question from me, what struck me, many things struck me about the video, but was the fact that Ms. Young didn't have any clothes on. And it took a very long time for anybody to even allow her handcuffed to cover up in any way. So talking about all of these new implementations, will something be included about if officers encounter somebody who doesn't have any clothes on or in a similar sort of situation, so they're allowed to cover up?
Let me say it this way, because this is not complicated. If that was your mother, how would you want her to be treated?
That's right. That's right.
You don't train at an academy. We hire people who we think know right from wrong.
That's right.
And if they don't know right from wrong, they don't need to be police officers. And that's the straight answer that I'll give to your question. It's not complicated.
It's common.
Treat everyone with respect. Everyone deserves a measure of respect.
Since it's being used as training, though, I would assume that will come up.
Yes.
Okay, in that circumstance. Will police commit to, this is from our investigative producer team, will police commit to tracking wrong raids? Currently, you do not. I know it was addressed.
That's not correct. That's not correct.
That's not correct. And I think that's been asked and answered. We're going to review all of the search warrants, and where we've made mistakes, we're going to correct them.
But if I can add.
Yes, please, Mayor.
Part of the reason that we put in the requirement of initiating a CR when there's a mistake is so that we can track them, so that we do know, so that there is a contemporaneous investigation that happens, and that we don't have these cases. And candidly, we shouldn't have the media do our job for us. That's why we made that specific change.
That is what Dave Savini was just asking me. You just touched on that. Why did it take our television station, CBS 2, to continue to report on these matters before real changes were implemented?
Look, I can't account for what happened before I became mayor, but when I became aware, there were many things that we walked into when I first became mayor in May of 2019. And I will credit your reporting for raising this to the top of the pile of issues that we needed to deal with, and we reacted to change the policy because of what you were seeing, and then as we were digging in, what we were seeing as the inadequacies in the pre-existing policy.
This question from Greg Pratt. Mayor, can you describe the November 19th emails, which you alluded to earlier, where Ms. Young's case was flagged for you, and would you release them?
Yeah, we will release them. We're doing a deep dive to look and make sure that we have everything, and we are absolutely planning to release them. It was literally somebody saying, Mayor, here's another one, something, words to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. And I said, okay, let's talk about it. Let's get Tamika involved, Tamika being Tamika Puckett, our chief risk officer. And then there was a subsequent email from her about, because I was pushing her on what are we doing, where are we on revising the search warrant protocols, and she gave a detailed update of that. That's some and substance of it.
Greg also wants me to say thank you for your words, your kind words today. Apology accepted. Okay, moving on. Fran Spielman from the Sun-Times. If you're so furious with Corporation Counsel Mark Flessner, why not demand his resignation? Has he offered it?
Well, there's a lot of facts that I still need to understand, and we are looking at everything, and I will make decisions about personnel once I have a better handle on what happened, particularly over the course of this week.
Those are really the questions for... I'm moving to more off-topic questions now.
Yeah, that's fine.
This one I'm asking because I missed it yesterday and I felt terrible. It's from Aaron Gettinger of the Hyde Park Herald.
Okay.
Can you explain why your draft substitute ordinance to Alderman Leslie Hairston's legal rights for detainees ordinance would extend the window for phone calls for those in police custody from 1 to 3 hours and only give arrestees telephone access when they request to speak with counsel instead of automatically. State law expressly states law enforcement should provide people in custody access to a phone generally within the first hour.
I'm not sure that that's correct. Let's go back to the Police Accountability Task Force. We had a number of civil rights lawyers that were part of that work, and as a consequence, one of the things that we recommended and the city adopted back then was that in every interrogation room there is information about what your rights are and a number that you can call to get a lawyer. Many times in my experience, as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney, when somebody is in custody, they may just want to call their family member to say, hey, here I am, can you make the calls? So giving access to a phone in a timely fashion is really important. The substitute ordinance that we had proposed has a 3-hour that this has to be done obviously expeditiously, but no later than 3 hours. That's consistent with LA, which has a 3-hour window, and there are other major cities, New York being one of them, that have no rules on when access to a phone has to be given. We're going to continue to work with Alderman Hairston, who obviously feels very passionately about these issues, and rightfully so, and I'm hoping that we can get to some kind of compromise.
A question from a couple different reporters, including Craig Dellamore. Can you comment on the Inspector General's report saying CPD and COPA have been too quick to drop investigations of alleged officer misconduct when there's no sworn affidavit, despite the ability to continue to those investigations with other evidence?
Well, I'm just hearing about the IG's report. I'd like to have the opportunity to read it, which I haven't yet. But bottom line is, if there's compelling evidence, and for whatever reason the complainant doesn't sign an affidavit, there is an opportunity, despite that fact, to do what's called an affidavit override, meaning investigate the case even when you don't have a signed affidavit. I've had multiple conversations with Sidney Roberts of COPA that needs to be exercised in the appropriate case. So I'll read the IG's report, but bottom line is, if somebody makes a complaint and there's corroborating evidence, even if the person doesn't sign an affidavit, which there's lots of reasons why that might not happen, and it doesn't mean that the person's complaint isn't real, then COPA or IAD has an absolute obligation to move forward with the investigation and not just put it to the side and move on to more pressing matters.
This question is from Craig Wall at ABC 7. Mm-hmm. I think it's for you. You reassigned a police lieutenant after you were blindsided by the luncheon visit of William Barr. Is anyone going to be reassigned or fired in this case?
I can tell you that's not for me.
Okay, sorry. I'm trying to
Since
juggle
I don't
questions.
do anything with police personnel.
That's inaccurate. I wouldn't trust that source that gave you that information. We don't discuss personnel decisions that we make regarding lieutenant sergeants or chiefs being moved, promoted, or demoted. And so, but that sequence of narrative is inaccurate.
Well, actually, don't move,
Okay.
Superintendent. Sam
No worries.
Charles with the Sun-Times asks, the 11th District, and I think I know what your answer is going to be, but the 11th District on the west side is on pace to record at least 100 murders this year, 2020. Why did you remove Darrell Spencer as commander of the 11th and make him commander of the Critical Incident Response Team?
Ditto to the answer. This has been an extraordinary year of violence in not only this city but in this country. Because of various circumstances, it's likely been the most perfect storm that we've had, with a global pandemic, unemployment, the largest since the Great Depression, along with impacts on lives because of people who have passed because of COVID, the impact, you can't have a funeral, you can't visit them when they're in the hospital. It's just various issues that have all convened at one time on 2020. And I could just tell you the most impactful is the violence on residents that we've seen, along with the violence on our police officers that we've seen. A 300% increase of violence against police officers this year over last year. 78 officers been shot at or shot, and we have had our officers die from COVID who are brave, courageous, but one thing officers are apprehensive about is bringing a virus home to their families who didn't sign up for public service. And so their concern has impacted. The courts have slowed to a crawl. Our jails is at the lowest capacity that it's been in any time anybody can remember. And we are on pace to recover 11,000 guns in 2020. We're at 10,700 guns recovered. And in every recovery is a potential deadly force encounter. So it has been the most perfect storm, not impacted at all by any personnel move.
Last two questions.
Any other questions on that?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But let me add regarding Commander Spencer, because I don't know what the intent of the question was, but let me just say this. Darrell Spencer's a good, hardworking policeman. He's given his blood, sweat, and tears to the West Side community where he's from. He's very well regarded by the residents of the West Side, very well regarded within the police department. I know the superintendent also holds him in high regard. Being a district commander is a very hard job. Being a district commander of the 11th district in the city of Chicago is an extraordinarily hard job, and Darrell Spencer has done a good job.
Last two questions.
Okay, this one is from Ben Bradley at WGN-TV. The head of the FOP told members last night, the city doesn't give a damn about you or if you die, and they should think twice about putting themselves in harm's way. He used the initial hesitation to give Officer Moore a full honors funeral. Your response?
I don't even understand that comment, honestly. I don't even understand it. Here's what I'll say. We have gone through extraordinary efforts to keep all of our first responders safe, period. We've spent millions of dollars. We've done outreach. We provided PPE. We provided masks. We have done a significant amount to make sure that our first responders, including our police officers, are safe, and will continue to do so. Superintendent recently instituted a Wear Your Mask campaign to educate members further about the dangers of not wearing a mask. And unlike the FOP, that belatedly got the memo that COVID-19 is real and deadly, if you look at their social media page and you look at the comments that the president of the FOP has made throughout the year, I don't need to wear a mask. I'm fine. I'm strong. I'm healthy. When do they finally get religion? The day before they filed 3 meritless attacks on the city regarding COVID-19 protections. I think that the fact that they did that and when they did it and all the statements leading up to it was unbelievably reckless and irresponsible to their members. COVID-19 is real. It is killing people in our city every single day. I'm glad that the FOP has finally gotten religion, but really, really late in the game.
Last question.
This is from Alex Nitkin at the Daily Line. We touched on this yesterday, but yesterday Alderman Lopez sent your proposal to modify the city's welcoming ordinance to the Rules Committee, saying it could have dangerous consequences by making it harder to prosecute some violent gang members. What's your response, and are you confident it will pass as is next month?
Yes, I am confident that it will pass. I'm confident that we will remove the carve-outs from the welcoming city ordinance that activists and other elected officials have been championing for a number of years. I said this yesterday and I'll say it again. Alderman Lopez has said a number of incredibly offensive and racist things about our immigrant and refugee community here in Chicago. We have almost 600,000 people who hail from different parts of the country but call Chicago home. We have an obligation to make sure that we continue to be a welcoming sanctuary city. And that is what we are going to do. It doesn't matter the roadblocks that Alderman Lopez in his xenophobic comments and actions tries to do. The notion that somehow we will be less safe because we protect immigrants and refugees flies in the face of logic. It's incredibly offensive, and it's just plain stupid.
Final question, Dana.
Great, thank you. It's from Kristen Schorsch at WBEZ. It's about vaccine
Yes.
doses. Like the rest of Illinois, is Chicago receiving less COVID-19 vaccine than expected? And if so, will there be enough for healthcare workers who are receiving their first dose this week to receive their second dose in time?
I believe so. We have been receiving, as you know, we put in an order for 23,400 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. It's our expectation if Moderna gets approved, that we'll put in an even larger order for that. Healthcare workers have started getting vaccinated this week. And we are working continuously with our hospital partners to make sure that that happens. Some hospitals are getting their own shipments directly. For those that are not, the Chicago Partner of Public Health is providing those doses. And it's my expectation by early next week, every hospital in the city, either through direct shipment to them or through the CDPH, will have started the vaccinations of their healthcare workers. Obviously, there are 400,000 healthcare workers in the city of Chicago. We're getting a portion of what we need, but I feel confident that over time we will get the number that we need, and then we'll start the next phase, which are going to be residents and employees in long-term care facilities. So that is the good news of this week in an otherwise challenging week.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.